Welcome to Sippy Softswitch video tutorial on the system structure and dependencies. Sippy Softswitch is a complicated system comprising hundreds of elements with different parameters and settings. Also, many elements are interdependent of each other, and some groups of the elements include one or a combination of elements from other groups. Combinations of the system elements with the myriads of settings and relations between elements can form virtually unlimited amount of the system configurations. We encourage you to carefully study main system elements and parameters via reviewing this tutorial charts and explanations. The better you commit the diagrams we will be showing to your memory, the more efficient and easy will be your process of learning how to configure the system. The system comprises several groups of element classes such as accounts, routing groups, vendors and connections, destination sets and routes, tariffs and rates, and the service plans. Each element of the particular class can consist of other elements or incorporate selected elements of other classes. For instance, the routing group consists of selected elements of vendors and connections and destination sets. We will review each class in turn and will discuss main relations and interdependencies between the elements in this and other modules of Sippy system videos. First, let's review the structure of the accounts. The system may have a number of accounts. We denote accounts as A1, A2 and so on at the diagrams. Each account has its multiple parameters divided by groups and include the elements of other classes such as the elements from routing groups and service plans. These inclusions from other classes are depicted with arrows. This is how the diagram of account structure looks fully unfold. The parameters are grouped by logically related elements and their necessity for respective levels of system configurations. For instance, the basic parameters of account such as account name, web password etc. are required for the very basic configuration of the system, and they are combined in basic parameters section. As we noted before, each group member may incorporate the elements from other groups. For instance, one of the account parameters is a service plan. But the service plan itself is a very complicated system entity of various elements with dozens of parameters. Next class of system elements is routing groups. The system may contain multiple routing groups. Each routing group in turn consists of a number of routing entries and routing policy that specifies how the system selects routing entries from the group. Each routing entry combines one connection of respective vendor and one destination set as well as individual parameters set to this routing entry. It is important to understand that in the system there are parameters that are set for each particular element individually, as well as the parameters or algorithms that are applied to the whole group or even class of elements simultaneously. For instance, activation date and expiration date are individual parameters of each routing entry. On the other hand, the routing policy is the algorithm of selecting the routing entries applied to all routing entries of particular routing group. The next class of elements is vendors. The system may contain information and parameters of many vendors. We denote them as V1, V2 and so on. Each of the vendors in turn has its own parameters and contains multiple connections. Vendor 1 has its own unique parameters such as name in the system, web login and password, base currency for this vendor, its time zone and so on. Vendor 2 as Vendor 1 has its own parameters and a number of connections. Next class of objects in the system is destination sets. We denote destination sets as DS1, DS2, and so on. Each destination set has certain parameters and the list of routes associated with this destination set. DS1 has its own parameters and set of routes, and DS2 has its own parameters and routes. DS1 parameters, like everyone else destination sets parameters, include destination set name, free seconds, currency for this destination set, etc. Each destination set comprises one or more routes, and each of the routes has a number of its own parameters. The parameters of the destination set, such as free seconds, currency, post-call surcharges, and the others, are equally applied to all the routes of this destination set, while the route parameters such as prefix, timeouts, preference, etc. are applied to each route individually. As with destination sets that contains information on destinations provided by vendors as specified by prefixes, the prices that vendors charges, the parameters used in the algorithm of calculating the vendor's charge for the call, and some other parameters, the tariffs and rates contain respective information and related parameters for calculating prices and charging the clients for routing their calls to respective destinations. The system may contain multiple tariffs. Each tariff has a list of rates and tariff parameters that equally apply to this tariff rates. Tariff parameters include the tariff name, free seconds, and so on. The parameters set for each rate individually are the prefix, activation and expiration date, and so on. Sippy Softswitch may contain a number of service plans. A service plan is a whole combination of all kinds of charges we may use for a particular client, as well as the parameters of each respective type of the charge. Each service plan includes its basic parameters that comprise one of the tariffs, service surcharges, accessibility surcharges, and minute plans. Each service plan can have a list of service charges with individual parameters for each service charge. For instance, a service plan can have one service charge for telephone rent and another for renting a gateway. For each service charge, several individual parameters are set. In addition to the tariff and a number of service charges, the user of the system can assign a list of accessibility surcharges, which defines how the system charges the clients for calls from direct inward dialing numbers, DID numbers in short. Each of the accessibility surcharge has its own set of parameters. And finally, each service plan can contain a number of minute plans. Each minute plan has its name and respective parameters such as price, grace period, and so on.